I was reading a book that was a series of interviews with the writer Ray Bradbury. And he had this line in the book that he said, we all have this desire to kind of go back and revisit our own myth. And that really resonated with me. And I started noticing, looking at my past comics that I've written, whether I have done historical fiction or sci-fi or other crime books, I was kind of seeding personal elements even into some of those properties. And I felt like I had this urge to do something more personal.
Welcome to another episode of the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. And this time I am welcoming back to the podcast Justin Giampaoli, Art Ebuen, for a new series titled Westside. We chat with Justin and Art and also artist Dave Law a little over a year ago, and it feels like it was just the other day, but I'm so glad to have you back talking about your new property, which, Justin, you teased that last time a little over a year ago. So I'm very excited to be talking with you about it now that it's here and it's on Kickstarter. So first and foremost, check out the Kickstarter. I'm going to have a link down here. I'll have a link in the show notes. Please go check that out. It is incredibly worth it. I just read through the advanced reader copy just last night, and I'm still buzzing over it. I was telling Justin and Art just before pressing record how incredible this story was. So this actually, first, before I gush about this, Justin, let me turn it over to you to introduce yourself and please pitch the book. I'd rather have you pitch it than me at this point.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. So, yeah, my name is Justin Giampaoli. I am the writer of Westside. The shortest pitch I found that resonates with people at the last couple conventions is it's True Detective meets California's Central Valley. So, it is a moody, small town crime drama about two deputy sheriffs investigating a series of unsolved violent crimes. The extra fun layer is that it actually takes place in my hometown. So I was able to infuse just a ton of autobiographical elements and kind of make an elegy to my hometown.
Yeah, awesome. And Art, do you mind introducing yourself as well for folks
I,
who haven't watched the episode from a year plus ago?
I think Justin just admitted that those unsolved crimes were actually his crimes, because it was in his hometown. So I'm just putting that out there.
Does that make us accomplices, Art?
Or we could be crime tipsters. Is that a thing?
We'll see what we edit out and leave into this, I suppose. But in the meantime, Art, tell us about
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah. I'm Art Ebuen, publisher at Studio 12/7. With Justin, we worked on California Ink together, and then pieces of Systemic. That was our anthology. And actually, we're working on another anthology together called Disrupted Tales. It's a horror anthology, and we'll be launching that uh, after West Side, after Systemic Volume 2, then comes Disrupted Tales Volume 1.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Justin. And okay, now that Justin's given the West Side pitch, I wanted to gush about it a little bit because, like I said, I just finished reading this and crime, noir, unsolved mystery type stuff is not typically my genre of choice, but I could not stop flipping pages in this. The dialogue really sang. There's a bunch of really interesting historical facts about Merced that I didn't know about. I'm a Californian, born and raised and lived for many years, and I did not know this history. I was like Googling on the side as I was reading the book and finding out new things. And uh, I was also mentioning to Justin before the record button was pressed that I felt like the pacing was so on point. Like there was never a point where things moved too fast for me to understand what was going on. Sometimes I feel like books can get a little choppy. That was not the case. It did not slow down or slog through any parts. Like there was really a healthy rhythm the entire time. Dave's art really brings this book alive as well. But man, Justin, your writing, I'm over the moon about this. So again, for anyone listening, check out the Kickstarter. It's happening right now. It's called West Side #1. But after you do that, let's come back and talk with Justin and Art. Justin, I wanted to talk to you about your need to create this book. You've mentioned before that during your time growing up in Merced, that your father told you things like, if you stay in this town, you're going to end up dead or in jail. And statements like those appear verbatim in this first chapter of West Side. I mentioned all this to say the story feels really important to you, and I was hoping that you might be able to dive into that for us.
Yeah, sure. First off, just thanks for the feedback. I mean, that is great to hear that it's landing the way we all intended. So that's amazing feedback. Thank you.
Awesome. The
Um,
feedback is sincere.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, you know, I have sort of struggled to answer the question for myself, where did this come from? And it finally clicked for me just a few weeks ago. I was reading a book that was a series of interviews with the writer Ray Bradbury. And he had this line in the book that he said, we all have this desire to kind of go back and revisit our own myth. And that really resonated with me. And I started noticing, looking at my past comics that I've written, whether I have done historical fiction or sci-fi or other crime books, I was kind of seeding personal elements even into some of those properties. And I felt like I had this urge to do something more personal. And, you always hear in writing that idea of write what you know. And I like to put a little caveat on that, that it is kind of write what you are uniquely qualified to tell and find that space for yourself. And I had this realization that I'm kind of in this nexus of being the only person I'm aware of that's from Merced, has had a brief experience in law enforcement, and also writes and edits comic books. So, how do I put all those things together? So, what I really did was put a ton of autobiographical elements in real people, real names, real places, things that happened to me, stories I heard that happened to other people, historical facts, put that all in a blender and created this cocktail and then poured it in the vessel of a crime story. So I like to say that it is mostly a fictional story, but it's based on very strong non-fictional parts that I think give it that hopefully strong air of authenticity.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, you mentioned something that I had a question written down about, which was the fact that you are the only Merced native who writes comics and is in law enforcement. You mentioned that last podcast we recorded together, and I wanted to touch base on that and talk to you about what kinds of experiences in law enforcement give you a leg up on writing a story like this.
I think really it comes down to being familiar with police procedures, the jargon, something as simple as what does realistic radio traffic sound like? Every industry has their own jargon that you use, whether you're a police officer, a graphic designer, whatever you might be. I always, when I write comics, I really try to shoot for that concept of the fancy word is verisimilitude. Basically, it just means it's got that air of authenticity, right? It sounds real. So whether you have those personal experiences to draw on or you really do a ton of research and front load your brain with that, I think that gave me kind of a leg up to, I know what a crime scene looks like. I know how cops sound. I know the way they talk and act and stand. I've been around enough real incidents or crime scenes or read enough, police procedural books and law books in school to really give it that hum of authenticity, I think.
That's great. Thank you, Justin. And Art, I don't want to leave you out of this.
No, this
I,
has really been insightful. But yeah, yeah,
yeah, I feel like this is Justin's project. Like
yeah,
California
yeah,
Inc. was your project. This feels
100%.
like Justin's project.
It
With
really
that
is.
said, you're the publisher, and I'm curious about your role in this. And how has it been shifting from the driver's seat to more of a supporting role on a project? Because you were all in on Cal Inc., and now it's all in on Justin's project. So, first, what is your current role in Westside? And then also, how has that shifting role been for you?
Um, it's similar to California, minus me being the writer. So all the way from promotion to designing the book from scratch, doing all the pre-press, working out all the negotiations with the printer, working out the timeline, working with our letter, which by the way, our unsung hero is Frank. Especially we talked about the flow of it all. And as you read the script, you love the flow of Justin's script with the dialogue versus the narration in Hope's head. And so Frank really complimented the heck out of that and really like captured even the spacing in between some of them. So you have that beat, especially like even the opening page, the first two blocks, a big space, and it's like he puts another one, just that little punchline kind of in the opening. He really, really nailed that. And just letting people like Frank do their thing. I think being that guy in between to find the right people to connect with, get all those notes from Justin, like, hey, how do you want this to work? That way I could translate his intent to then give Frank his marching orders. And then Frank had some questions too, because he wanted some clarification. Because, obviously, just like any form of art, there's some kind of direction that's needed to give him space to be artistic. So being that guy as a producer, like I am on set, that's what it's like being a publisher, just kind of empowering people to do their best with what they've got and give them the right amount of time and give them the right amount of energy so that it all comes together and it really sings. And hopefully it does. And I think you've kind of, testified towards that. So feeling good about that. With a focus group of one, I'm feeling pretty good so far.
100% success rate so far.
60% of the time, it works all the time.
So it sounds like, Art, you're very much in the role of indie publisher. You're wearing a lot of hats. You're taking care of a lot of logistics behind the
Mhm.
scenes. Are you doing any editing on this book too?
Little bits here and there. I'd like to say I did one big edit for me, which was, like, hey, there's one extra line that I think is literally repetitive, the line right before, and it helped kind of free up some space. But otherwise, Justin and I have pretty similar uh, you know, taste towards things. So I read the script way back, so I already knew I liked it, and all this was just helping him bring it to life. And I do love the other side of comics making, which is all this stuff. Like I do like designing books. I like laying it out. I do like, working with printers, just all the logistical parts of it, all the production part of it. It's a nice kind of it's a different kind of part of my brain. I could actually listen to music while doing it. Where while I'm writing, I can't. I can't
Yep.
listen to music because it's kind of like when someone's counting and you're trying to. Sorry, when you're trying to do some math and someone's counting out loud, it messes you up. So I can't listen to music while writing. But while I'm in production mode, all day I'll have music going. So it's kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So are you itching to get back to writing, or are you enjoying your time off for the moment?
Oh, this was a nice way for me to get some writing done slowly
Mm,
so that we have a book coming out. So while Justin's book was being made, I wrote two other stories going to two other things. And I'm in the middle of writing a longer story with somebody else that I'm going into round two with and working with Justin on that as well. He'll be our editor for that. And then, no, so this was a holdover so I could write slower. So I actually have two stories done with one more on the way. So so people don't have to wait too long for Studio 12/7's next book.
okay, fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
And for anybody tuning in for the first time, Studio 12/7 is the independent publishing company that Art Ebuen is publishing, California Inc., Westside, and it sounds like more to come. So that's really exciting. Um, so over the course of reading this first installment of Westside, and I hesitate to call it an issue because it's 50 some odd pages, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of like a double issue crammed into one. So really great bang for your buck. If I'm not mistaken, I think you're offering it at $15. Is that right?
Yeah,
For
and
the
you're actually
printed
right.
copy?
It's originally Justin, if you want to go into it, it's five issues, and we decided if you want to break it down.
Yeah, I had originally written this as a five-issue series, and I can even talk a little bit about the genesis of pitching that to other places. But it's a five-issue series overall. We wanted to break it into two volumes. So the first kind of introductory volume is the equivalent of two singles, two single floppy issues, and then volume two will be what essentially was issues three, four, and five with bonus content.
Yeah.
Great. I mentioned that because that sounds like a real good Kickstarter deal to me. Like I feel like
Yeah. Yeah.
Kickstarter comics are sort of climbing in price, and there's of course pros and cons to that. But I always like being able to pick something up at a reasonable price. So this double issue, $15. Head on over to that Kickstarter, guys. In the meantime, I mentioned all this to say that there's some like chapter breaks within this larger issue, and between those chapter breaks, there are some poems, and they're not by you, Justin. They are by Jacob Anthony Ramirez. And Justin, I was hoping you could talk to us about how you know Jacob. How did he get brought into the fold of Westside? What was the story behind that? I was a little surprised to find writing in this issue that was not yours.
Yeah, thanks for asking. He'll be thrilled that you noticed. Jacob is actually my first cousin, so our
Mm,
moms are sisters. And Jacob and I grew up together. He's also from Merced, so he is
mm,
very familiar with the source material. And in fact, you mentioned before there's a line of dialogue from my dad in this first volume. In the second volume, there's a line of dialogue that is a direct quote from Jacob, something he said to me years and years ago that I wrote down and said to
mm,
myself, if I ever write a story, I'm going to try to work this line of dialogue in
mm,
because it's great. So look for that in volume two. But Jacob's got an interesting background. He's initially was an educator. He was an English teacher, joined the Peace Corps, has taught English in China, Turkey, UAE, eventually got a PhD in poetry. And as two creative types, we always wanted to work together, and I never really could identify the right venue for that. And when this book came along, I had the thought of, oh, I should ask Jacob to write an introduction.
mm,
And I asked him to write an intro and said, hey, this is kind of an atypical book. You don't have to write a typical prose introduction. It could be a poem if you want.
mm,
And so Jacob exceeded expectations. He did write a prose introduction, which is a great piece that I think we're going to use as the intro to volume two because it kind of comments on the entire both volumes of the story. But he wrote these five poems that are just haunting and beautiful. And I had the thought to use them as chapter breaks because I didn't want those transitions to be rough jump cuts between chapters. And the type of poem he's using is a very specific type of poem. It's called a decima or a decima espinela. It's kind of a Spanish language poem that is got a 10-line stanza, has a very specific rhyming and syllable pattern. It's named after a guy named Vicente Espinel, who was a Spanish poet back in, I want to say, the late 1500s, early 1600s. And when Jacob started his PhD in poetry, he found this guy's work and just became so fascinated with this format that he's written quite a bit of poetry in this format. And being Hispanic himself and the large percentage of the population of the Central Valley is Hispanic, it just felt like a perfect fit and a perfect accompaniment for kind of this oddball project.
That's great. And not only are the poems haunting, but they feel very authentically Merced, especially after reading through the comic itself. And it feels like it sort of comments on it or suggests things coming into the future. It felt very resonant with the story that you were telling. I'm assuming that he had read the story before writing the poems. Is that right?
Yeah, I gave him an advanced look at all of the scripts.
Mhm.
So he didn't see the finished art and finished product, but he read the scripts, and those were kind of the things that jumped out at him and that he had the most visceral reaction to. And he ran with it and focused on one element of each chapter to expand in that poetry format.
Mm. Excellent. Well, give him some high fives from me too.
Will do.
Um, so, Justin, I think I heard somewhere, I don't think it was the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast from last year. It may have been another interview or just conversations, during conventions, but I thought I heard that you took Dave Law, artist of Westside, on a trip to Merced and for some reconnaissance for the book. And I'm curious if I know you can't speak for Dave, but like, what were you hoping Dave would get from this trip? You're very familiar with the place, but I'm guessing this was to sort of like introduce him to the location that this story is all about, that he's going to be working on for the next, 100 pages or so.
Yeah, my original intent was really to just get him familiar with the place. And he took a bunch of reference photos. I went up to Merced to visit my aunt and uncle who still lived there. He made a 2 hour drive from San Jose, met us there for lunch. We got to spend the whole day together cruising around town and checking out the old downtown. And he took a bunch of reference photos in 105-degree heat. Um, we got a chance to go out to what is now Castle Air Museum. It used to be Castle Air Force Base and actually see that firsthand.
Oh, wow.
So the way that translated to the page, I think, is really worth commenting on. I mean, Dave is probably the most intuitive artist I have had the opportunity to work with. He really instantly understood the vibe and the tone I was going for and was able to translate that to the page with very intentional choices. I think, looking back, being the editor of California Ink., the book he worked on with art, I got to see Dave's art come in as he was completing the pages for California Ink. And seeing how he was interpreting art scripts. And I really saw art begin to trust him as an artist. And I felt like I started trusting him too. And that allowed me to script a lot looser.
Hmm.
And there's a really good example in the early pages of this volume. Hope, who is the main character, she's at her father's funeral. And I think on that script, I might have said, hey, there's two panels on this page. They're at a funeral. It's kind of a somber scene. There's not a lot of people around. That's not a lot of direction. But Dave, picked the camera placement, made the brilliant decision to backlight this shot. He
Hmm.
created these really elongated shadows that kind of pull the reader's eye into the page and really sell that mood. And those are things that, I didn't script. Those are Dave's creative choices and him intuitively understanding the right vibe, the right tone, and just selling it visually. So couldn't be happier with it.
Hmm. That's great. There's also some interesting cultural history of Merced revealed in this story with Italian immigrants settling in the area with Native Americans, and Hope's character is of Italian and Mexican heritage. Justin, I'm curious, what is your cultural background and how closely does it parallel Hope's? And can you talk about why this is significant to the story of Westside?
Yeah, her background's pretty similar to mine. So I am 3/4 Italian, 1/4 Mexican. By comparison, Jacob, the poet who you asked about before, he's the flip side of that. So he's 3/4 Mexican, 1/4 Italian, because our moms married different people, obviously. But that's a big, big component. I think one of the things I wanted to really sell with Hope was her just feeling like an outsider, whether that was her ethnicity, whether that was her gender, and being able to attack that concept from multiple angles. Her last name, Martini, just as a kind of bonus fact, that is my maternal grandmother's maiden name. So that was just a little thing I wanted to throw in as a nod to my grandmother. So the book is just chock full of literally every name, every place, every street has some significance.
And actually, there's something in there that resonated with me that I think you hit on with a lot of immigrants and their first generation immigrants and their children. Justin, as you mentioned, she says something to the effect of, "I was too white for the Mexicans and too Mexican for my white friends," and that's something that I know a lot of my Filipino culture people and my friends talked about when we were growing up here in San Diego. It's something that I think you nailed. That would resonate with a lot of folks who are dealing with that identity crisis and where they're landing in their culture out here.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It reminds me of something the writer Brian Michael Bendis said a long time ago about writing. He actually said that the more specific you make something in the writing, the more universal its appeal, which seems counterintuitive. But using those very specific examples can resonate with people, even if, you're Filipino versus Mexican or Italian, but the experience can be similar and the feeling can be similar behind it.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of like mixed race othering in the book. There was some obvious gender roles being played out in different ways. Yeah, I'll try not to spoil the story, but there's a lot to unpack here and a really rich story being told. Additionally, lots of uh, very interesting stats about Merced, or maybe this is beyond Merced. One thing that really struck me is that 87% of violent crimes division caseloads go unresolved. Like, there's this sort of uh, grizzled veteran vibe to Hope, and she gets this newcomer partner, and obviously they're outlook on things are very different from one another, and seeing them bounce off of one another was really an interesting part of this story. Um, and I'm curious, I'm assuming that's a genuine fact. Is that right? Like, if so, that's something I did not know before, but being part of law enforcement, Justin, I'm guessing this is a true statistic. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would depend on the municipality you're in. Every city or county is going to have a different stat that they run, but certainly more crimes go unsolved than are solved. And I think, in popular media, movies, TV shows, you want to believe that, well, they always catch the killer and they always find the bad guy and they always discover the mystery. And I kind of deliberately wanted to go against type that at least the first few cases you see this duo attack, it goes nowhere. And what does that do to a person? What does that do to your own sense of optimism and your own mental health when, you can't solve the crime, you can't serve justice? That's got to have an effect on people.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like there's so many interesting historical facts to touch on, like the fact that Castle Air Force Base was closed, and that led to declining of 62% of real estate over the course of the next decade. Just I don't know. I found myself really interested in the interspersed history within this story,
Hmm.
and it led me to my own research outside of reading the book and getting to know this area of California better that I really had no knowledge about before, and it feels very strange because I grew up, just hours away from there. So why is this so foreign to me? So anyway, thank you for prompting this research on my part.
Sure.
Um, I'm also curious to talk to you, Justin, in particular, about self-publishing.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of that, but you've also worked for large companies, DC Vertigo, Dark Horse, we can rattle off a whole list of places that you've worked for. And then you did not work for comics companies for a while. And I know that you kind of had maybe a falling out is an appropriate term. And I really wanted you to make your own way in this industry and try out self-publishing. And now that you're in the middle of it, you've been a part of California Inc. You're launching your own story right now on Kickstarter. How is this treating you? How are you feeling about this? And how are things differing from going the traditional publishing route? I'm
Sure.
really curious about your thoughts, your comparisons between the two.
Yeah, I mean, it feels great overall. I'll just say that up front. But the history, I think, with this project is interesting. I mean, I had two books published at Dark Horse, Rome West in 2018, Starship Down in 2020. Westside was meant to be my third Dark Horse book. I wanted to pitch that to Dark Horse as a follow-up. And we all know in 2020, the pandemic hit. That had just a devastating impact to the economy. The publishing landscape just radically changed. And I guess it became clear to me that, at least at Dark Horse, unless you were Mike Mignola with an established property like Hellboy, or you were a big name like Tom King coming in to do a creator-owned book like Helen of Windhorn, which I highly recommend, um, there wasn't a big publishing appetite. And I was talking to an editor at Vertigo at DC at the time as well. I was talking to an editor at Image/Skybound, and the feedback I got on Westside was kind of universal in that they all kind of said some version of, hey, this is really well written and this is interesting, but we don't know how to sell this. And I thought that was interesting. And looking at it objectively, I can kind of look back and go, okay, it has like an atypical narrative structure. I wanted to do it in black and white. It's got these weird autobio elements. There's poems in it. It's maybe not a terribly commercial project for a traditional publisher. And so I think it's exactly the type of passion project that you want to pursue through self-publishing and crowdfunding. And over the last, gosh, I guess almost 4 years now, I've been in this position where I've gotten to table with Dave and Art at conventions and do retailer signings with them and really see what audiences respond to in the indie space. And it became clear to me that I've got a small set of fans of my writing, and Dave's got a pretty large set of fans for his art, especially with Dungeon Crawler Carl kind of blowing up. Art's got fans of not only his writing, but his publishing house. I mean, he's got half a dozen books published now, 3 titles, I think, four, soon to be four. And when you start putting those disparate fan bases together under one tent, it becomes really powerful. So I think I transitioned from being disillusioned with comics publishing to being a little more optimistic and finding a niche that felt right and felt natural and was viable.
That's interesting. It strikes me as odd that a publisher would say that it's difficult to pitch a book this good. Like you mentioned, there's autobiographical elements to it, but if I did not know you, Justin, I wouldn't read this book and think, oh, this is autobio. It feels very authentic, but it doesn't read like autobio. It reads like a great piece of fiction,
Sure.
piece of crime fiction. But I think it's more interesting knowing some of the nuances of your experiences and how that's informed this book. But man, I've said it already. I flew through this book in the best of ways. So I hope folks will give it a try. Um,
I find
Art,
that
yeah,
I find
go
that
for it.
interesting, the how do we sell this kind of thing. And it's funny because I'm a true believer in like if someone has a passion, their passion will sell it because they're trying to tell you about this. So like in presentation, because I love presenting to people. It's funny because people get nervous, and I get it because I used to get nervous too. But if you're excited about something, I'm not presenting, I'm just sharing with you something I'm really happy about. I'm really excited about it. So it shows me that they probably weren't as excited as maybe they thought they were, because then if you call it selling, then you're just trying to market the dang thing, which I get what that's what we're trying to do. But if you are excited about the project or the piece or the art or whatever it is, you're just sharing. You're just sharing something you're excited about. And, Justin's excited about it, so I was infected by it. And it's funny because reading the book, you're infected by it too. And then as you brought up, Merced is actually for me the main character, right? In most ways. And that's kind of how I would personally sell it, when I'm speaking to somebody about it. And so I'm shocked. I didn't know that was a thing, Justin. They said, I don't know how to sell this. I'm like, well, and maybe you didn't know much about it. I don't know. Something it's really shocking to me. But at the same time, like, hey, it just wasn't for them, and that's fine. This is for us. This is for
Yeah.
you. This is for you. It's not even for us. It's for you. You know what I mean? So you and I, we're just having fun. We're just making fun stuff that we want to see on the shelves. And how fun is that?
Yeah. I also think, Ryan, it's interesting if you look at Westside in the Studio 12/7 library. That's an interesting thing.
Mm,
I mean, Art, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always felt like my perception was Art was interested in not just being a writer or a creator, but being a publisher and having
mm.
a publishing house. And, we would kind of daydream years ago, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Art was the publisher and I could be the editor? And we have this
Here we
stable of
are.
books with creative teams. And, publishing California Inc., I think that was his initial proof of concept that he's able to do these things. And Westside is kind of taking it a step further. Well, let's test that publishing model. How would it work with a property that Art doesn't own outright?
Mm.
What would the business model look like? What do the contracts look like? What does ownership, financials look like? So, I don't know that I'm not going to speak for Art. I don't know that we're ever going to get to the point where we're like opening up Studio 12.7 for unsolicited submissions, but it's a step in that direction of, wow, we could publish things that maybe we weren't involved in the writing of or the creation of or the editing of. It opens the door for more possibilities for the types of projects that could be taken on at the publisher.
And your anthology projects seem to be a good step in that direction, getting to work with multiple folks on a single project and getting to know how each person works. Is that right?
Yeah, that was super interesting. Going from, like you said, Justin, my own thing with support from friends and family, and then building our own, our slowly building our audience, to right before we started yours, jumping right into an anthology, then taking on six other teams, working out those contracts, and then paying people out. Like going from one of my own to like seven in one book to then going to yours, which is kind of cool. But it's like just each time diving deeper into the waters. And so just feeling comfortable each time after initially submersing under and catching your breath. But it's fun. It's fun. There are some risks to it, but it's just that much more of a satisfying win when we have it in our hands and someone says, "Oh, what is that? I'd love to pick that up," you know? So it's it's um it's still scary, but also Justin, like you said, we were talking about this like 3 years ago, and it's interesting to see where we're at.
Yeah, yeah. Nice progress, guys. Art, I wanted to bounce off something you mentioned a couple few minutes ago, is that you saw Merced as the main character
Mhm.
of Justin's Westside. And Justin, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about ways in which you might involve Merced with this book. Do you have any thoughts about like in-store signings in Merced, or going there and presenting it to folks, or talking with city councils? Or I understand it's complicated because the book does not exactly paint Merced in the brightest of lights. So I can see there being sort of a push-pull there. Like I get the sense that there's some element of connection, nostalgia, interest in the place with your roots there, at the same time presenting it for what it is. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, because it's very Merced focused. How are you moving forward with that? Are you sort of stepping back and hoping that Merced does not see this, or are you making steps toward drawing their attention to this? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple layers we're kind of exploring. So there are a couple retailers in Merced. I actually worked at a comic shop in high school in Merced,
Hmm.
but that one's no longer there. But there are actually two comic shops in Merced in the modern era, which I think is really cool. So I'm definitely approaching them about doing signings at those stores. I know Art has had some initial conversations. It's not in Merced. I think it's
Modesto,
town over, Modesto, but
yep,
there is it a like
Latinx,
Latino Latinx comics
come,
festival
yep,
that I think would be a really cool venue. And there's some local
yep.
educators that are involved in that as well. So there could be a bridge there to some, classroom presentations as well.
Yeah, and honestly, going back to the negative light that it's sort of that the story might point at Modesto, if anything, I thought it's more of a positive thing that a creator from Modesto came up with such a powerful story and could be kind of like, I mean, I mean, The Wire doesn't say much about Baltimore being the shiniest place, but there's some pride in that. And I don't know, just kind of, I'm not saying that violence is just, it kind of, like I said, it makes Merced a celebrity for me in a way, and it teaches a person who's reading through about the history. And I'm sure you felt that same way, Ryan, like, just kind of like, oh, that's how the economy kind of tanked, and the logistics, I mean, so the policies behind things and how they changed. And it gives you some empathy for for the people who live there, and makes you look into it a little bit more, and I felt a softness to that in that because of that, you know.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I hope you make some headway there. It seems like there's got to be some sort of a great fit for this.
Yeah, I think so the convention that Justin was talking about the there are some educators at the local community college who just again it's about Merced and just about the same Central Valley. So I think that's a nice entry point for them to have a local writer come out and just talk about their process, his process.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard great things about the Latinx Comics Festival as well. I've got some buddies from my hometown who just exhibited there recently.
Yeah,
So yeah,
cool.
I'd be happy to put you in touch with the folks that I know if you're interested.
Let's do it.
Um, so Art, I wanted to veer from West Side just a little bit because when you and Justin and Dave talked with me on this podcast a little over a year ago, you not only mentioned that West Side was coming up, but that you and Dave were also working on a follow-up California Ink story, and it sounds like you've got more things planned beyond
Mhm.
that. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what's that next California Ink story? When are we seeing that? Was it part of your anthologies?
Mhm.
And then what do you have coming up after that? Wanted you to give you a chance to chat about what you're doing too creatively.
Yeah, so the follow-up or the side story for California Inc. is a story called Reclaim CA. It dives into a little bit of the backstory of Big Sis and Little Bro, or LB, and we actually got the first part of the three-part story out last year in our anthology called Systemic. So Systemic is an anthology of stories of people fighting against systems larger than them or forces larger than them. So hence systemic. And we have seven different stories in there. At this point, they were all sci-fi, but I think the next iteration might not be 100% sci-fi. There might be a little bit of fantasy in there, but it's about systemic issues and people fighting against those. So the first one was much more successful than we thought it was going to be in a good way. So we're not upset about that. We have a whole new lineup for volume four that Ben Crane, he's the editor for that book. He and I are in the middle of doing that. So right after we launch, when we're finished with Westside Volume One, about 2 months later, so the end of July, we'll be running Systemic Volume Two, and then Justin and I are working on a horror anthology later on. But yeah, for California Inc., we have the three parts. Part one is already out. It's Systemic Volume One. Part two will be in Systemic Volume Two, and then obviously part three of Reclaim CA will be in Systemic Volume Three.
Awesome. Sounds like you're keeping busy.
Yeah.
So, Justin, is there anything that you want folks to know about Westside? This is a new property. People are getting introduced to it. What have I not asked you that you wish you could have talked about here?
Um, I think there's just more things in it that would appeal beyond a simple crime story. I think if you are interested in California culture or historical fiction, historical factoids, if you're interested in race relations, if you're interested in car culture, it's the intersection of a lot of these different subcultures that kind of mingle together. Um, so yeah, I think I hate to use a cliche, but I think it's got something to offer everyone, depending on where your interests lie.
Well, Justin, am I right in saying you're somewhat of a history buff? Is that pretty accurate? I think that if you look at the thread between West Side, Starship Down, and Rome West, hey, the word West is in there twice. Um, you've got a lot of history built in, and so Justin's really about weaving the nonfiction of history into his fiction, which is, again, we talked about this earlier, Ryan, like how well that narration is complemented and weaved into the dialogue, even right in the middle of the dialogue throughout West Side. So there's something really special about Justin's understanding of pattern of human kind of interaction through history that's kind of nice. And I really at the end it's like, wow, I really learned a lot about Merced. Let me let me go dive in a little deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in such a narratively driven way, like not a textbook or preachy type of way. It's woven in so beautifully, and uh it's very story driven. Uh I'm sorry, Justin, I think I cut you off there.
No, I was just going to agree. Yeah, I think there's those historical factoids are in there. One thing I failed to mention, I think for film buffs, if you're a very eagle-eyed reader, you will be able to see some influences from certain films and certain directors that I either consciously or subconsciously were part of the writing process. So that's in there as well.
Do you mind letting us in on those director notes? Who are you looking at
Sure.
for
I mean, there's
imagery?
definitely some Martin Scorsese influences in there. If you look at the kind of the voiceover narration of Henry Hill and Goodfellas, or I've really been a fan of William Friedkin, the movies he's directed. I think he's most well known for The Exorcist and The French Connection, but a slightly more modern film he did is called To Live and Die in L.A. And
Mm.
it's in my top five films of all time, a great crime film set in LA, where LA is really the main character and the storytelling engine for this really offbeat, quirky, moody crime series. There's, some Anton Fuqua in there as well. So yeah, there's a lot of just, I think, film influences as much as there are other comic book influences in here.
And anecdotally, didn't To Live and Die in LA somewhat have an influence on the cover?
It did, yeah. If you when Dave went to do cover designs, I literally gave him one piece of art as art direction and inspiration, and that was the film poster of this movie To Live and Die in LA to really capture the color palette I was shooting for. And as you can probably tell from the cover, I think Dave just knocked it out of the park with his beautiful image.
His covers, my goodness.
Yeah,
Dave's
yeah.
covers.
Made your job real easy to make that Kickstarter image, right, Arthur? Art.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I that's interesting to hear because I feel like as comic creators, we do draw a lot of inspiration from film. And there was a book that I was reading when I feel weird saying this. It feels like a brag, but when I was reading a million comics for judging the Eisner Awards the other year,
Hmm.
one of them that really stood out to me was Ashes by Alvaro Ortiz. And
Hmm.
reading through that, I felt like, oh, this is very much like dark humor of Coen Brothers meets like quirky camera angles and storytelling of Wes Anderson, and it has very much that like blending of those two feel for me. But then in reading, was it the introduction or the afterword by somebody, they were citing some other filmic references that I just did not get. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe I'm off base. And then I read an interview with Alvaro Ortiz and he cited exactly, he's like Coen Brothers, Wes
Ah.
Anderson. I'm like, all right. So I'm picking up what you're throwing down. So it's nice to hear some of your influences too, Justin. I do want to be wary of your time, and I do have one more question for you. So, Justin, within Westside, there is a phrase that comes up, and I'm curious what the moniker "a son of the Central Valley" means to you,
Hmm.
and would you consider yourself one?
Hmm. I would consider myself one. I think it is probably tied up in the notion of like transcending your origin or transcending your past,
Hmm.
right? Regardless of where you're from, who your family was, socioeconomic status, really, sky's the limit. You can achieve bigger and better things. It's just about transcending those relatively humble origins, I think.
And so the other son of Central Valley is George Lucas. So you two, so you sound like you're saying you're, yeah, yeah, okay, gotcha.
Well, I was about to say I can't think of a better way to wrap it up, but thanks, Art. Very good. So
Sorry.
thank you so much, both Justin and Art, for coming on today. And for anyone listening, check out the show notes. There's a link in there to the Kickstarter for Westside Volume 1 by Justin Giampaoli from Studio 12-7. Art, Justin, thank you so much for your time today and best of luck on this campaign. It deserves all the sales you get and then some. This was really an incredible trip, and I'm already clamoring for Volume 2. Great work.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks for having us.